Hi everyone. In the last video, I got a question asking, what is the correct way to save a file so it can be added to the library and used in layers later? And I thought it would be a good idea to just cover the topic in a separate video, so let's look at that. I found a few different methods to use your element graph projects in your layering projects, similar to what you would do with Substance Painter with the Substance Archive files for materials. I suggest you watch all of these methods and find the workflow that would be optimal for your use case. I will also be linking all of the documentation in the description for reference. Before we get started on adding the materials to our library, let's look at how to use the materials in a layering project in the first place and fix all the settings. I have a couple of materials I previously made in other tutorials and some other ones as well. If we want to use any of these in a layering project, we can just create a new project in the same package. We can create an asset texturing project. So I'm creating one quickly, and for the mesh, we can pick package resource and just select any. I'm just picking the plane and we can just give it any name as it's just a test project. Create the project without any templates. Now we have a simple layering project. Let's open the package management tab with all our materials. Now we can just drag any of our element graph projects onto our layers. And there we have the material. Let's change the lighting so we can see it better. We can drag other materials as well, and it will be added onto another layer that you can work with. Here in the properties panel, you can select the projection mode, which is set to triplanar by default, and other mapping settings as well. In the layer channels tab, you can also see all the maps that are being used and adjust any individual map with the opacity and the blend mode settings. We also have the layer element settings. You can see the properties for the material. You can select the other material and the properties for that will be displayed. We also have the color property here as I added that, but by default you should only see the seed value. And this seed setting works the same as the overall seed that you have on top here in the element graph. Going back to the layering tab, we can also add other properties here that we can control. Basically, if we go to our material in the element graph, let's open up the dirt ground. We can essentially expose any input parameters and control it in our layering project later. For this dirt material, we can select the HSL node that is placed at the end of the base color. Just hit right click and hit expose input parameters, and we can select the values that we need. I'm just selecting hue, saturation, and luminosity. And now we have our three exposed parameters. Let's save the project. Now if we go back to the layering project, we have our hue, saturation, and luminosity that we can control here. You can change it as you like. You can also reset it and it will go back to the default value. And the default parameter is either what we choose before we hit expose, or you can also change the default value on the top here and just save. That should update the value. You can also delete any of the input, and like I mentioned, you can choose a different default value and hit expose again, and that should be the new default parameter. By the way, to get this property panel, if you have something else selected, just select one of the inputs, or you can also click on the empty space on the graph. You can also rename any of the inputs, rearrange them to your preference, And as you see, we deleted the first saturation node and it's showing that icon on the right as it is not linked to any value. And we can just hit delete to delete any parameter. You can also add any custom parameter. All of these are color coded based on their data types like boolean, integer, float, vector, or others based on what you might require for your project. Let's add one just to try, and we can call it whatever we want. We can hit right click and search our custom parameter that we just made. And we can connect it to control any of the parameter. Let's connect it to the hue. Now we essentially have the custom parameter controlling our hue. If we go back to the layering tab, we can find the custom parameter that we just created. And as you can see, that controls the hue. Right now, it's a different type of slider compared to the rest. We can go back to our material, find the parameter that we want to customize, right click on the name, and we have the option to change UI control type. We can select any of these. Let's pick slider. I personally like to use this. Or we can also change it to the percentage slider to match it with the remaining parameters. Let's connect the hue control again, and we will delete the custom parameter node. Also, don't forget to delete the parameter if you don't need it. Okay, that will be all for setting up the input values that you can use later. As this is so customizable, you can go back and have any of the parameters exposed, especially to control the colors of different elements and choosing your height map controls as well. It's completely up to you based on your material and your project requirement. And I cannot really suggest which parameters you need to expose for every material, as that would differ based on the type of material and what controls you require. With all that covered, let's look at how to add the material to your user library and access them in multiple packages. So for the first material, we are going to be exporting the individual material as a cooked project. So select the material, go to File, and Export Cooked Project. For now, I will just save it on the desktop as Dirt Test. And you will get this menu where you can choose whether you want the exported material to have the ability to be opened and modified later. For now, I don't care about modifying it, so I will just leave it on default and export it. Hit OK. Let's open a new package. Now, we can just drag and drop the project we exported into Instamat. Since we saved it to not be modifiable, we cannot open the package, but let's hit the Add to Library button. And we should have the material added in. In the material library, you can hit Show User Library Content. And on the default, we will have the material that we imported. Let's create another layering project. I will just do a simple plane again. And we can take our material, drag and drop it either in the Layers tab or directly on the object. And we have the material with all of the controls that we set. Going back to the material we imported, we can right click and you have some options. You can open it in your Explorer. You can find the material saved in your documents under Instamat and then Library. You can change the category that it shows up in. If you type out materials, it will put it into that category. And also add the icon same as what we have in the main built-in library. You can also add it into a category with a different name, but it won't add any icon for that as it doesn't recognize the name that we gave it. And you can also delete them if you want. So this is the method that I like to use personally, as it is easier to manage the materials since you're exporting them as individual files. This also works really well to transfer or share the material with other people. or to a different computer compared to just sharing the entire package. Now let's look at the second method to do this. I have a package open with multiple materials I want to add to my library. We can go to Edit, then Preferences, and we have User Paths. The default one is located in your documents. So here we are in the Instamat folder with some other folders as well. You can open the library folder. This is where you will save your package files, so the materials will show up in your library. Coming back, let's create a new custom library. I will create a folder on my desktop and call it Material Library Test. And we can select that folder. Here, you can see the new custom library we just created. You can also make that your default library, but let's not do that for now. And we can just hit OK. You need to restart Instamat to apply the updates to the user path and everything will be added in. But let's hit restart later for now. Now with our package where we have multiple materials we want to add to our library, we can just save that package file into the new user library we just created. So navigate to that and just save the package. And let's restart Instamat after this. When opening Instamat, you will have this pop-up window asking which packages you want to include in your user library. Here we have the package we just saved onto our desktop under the Material Library Test folder, which I just realized I mistyped. We can toggle that on and hit Include Package. Let's create a new project. Select Asset Texturing. Just pick a plane from the local resources again for testing. Now in our new package, if we open our preferences, we can see the custom library we added. We can also see that in our File Explorer, in our custom folder that we made, Instamat automatically adds all the folders you require, same as we saw in our Documents Instamat folder. It will also move the package we saved into the library folder, and you can save any other packages with other materials in this folder to add to your library. I like this method because if something goes wrong, it's easier to manage or delete the custom library we made, or you might want to save the library in a specific location on your hard drive. Really depends on your use case. If not, you can just save your packages in your Documents Instamat folder. Now in our material library, under defaults, we should find all our projects from the package. And this time, you don't need to be in Show Only User Library Content, and it will still show up. Let's drag one of the materials onto the plane. And we have all the options that we set. Before we finish, let's open the package with our materials once again. You can see how the materials are in the default category. We can change that individually later, but let's look at the correct way to categorize them so it will be easier to manage large library of materials. When you open the material, under the name of the material on the right, you can set the category. I'm just changing it to custom mat, and the material should be categorized according to this. I will repeat the same for the remaining materials. It's generally a good idea to categorize them in advance. Finally, save it in your library folder in the same location as earlier. We can just replace the old file to overwrite it. Now the materials show up in the custom mat category. It appears that I missed some of the material projects, so they appear in the default category. But this can easily be fixed by either going back and overwriting, or just right-clicking on the material and change category. Here I'm just creating a simple layering project to add multiple materials and blend them using masks. I'm just using mask painting here, but you can experiment with other methods based on what you need. So those are the two methods to add your element graph materials into your library and reuse them. I personally prefer the first method, but if you are building a package for your project with large number of materials to reuse, you can use the second method, and that is better for managing large number of materials and other assets. Coming back to the original package with our materials, there is also the option to share your materials to Polyverse. You can export as a 3D material or a cooked project. For that, you will require to create a Polyverse account. You can store and share assets online, but I don't really use that as I never really needed it and I'm not familiar with that workflow. But if that is something that you want to look at, you do have that option. With that being said, these are the methods that I was able to work with. There might be more optimal ways to manage your library. I would suggest to look at the documentation that is available on Instamat's official website. Link will be in the description. And you also have an official video from Instamat on creating custom asset library that goes more into detail covering how to add other assets like images, and you can also add custom meshes. That will also be linked in the description. And if you made it this far, I hope you found the video helpful and thank you for watching.